The views and opinions expressed on this program are those of the participants and do not reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
BronxNet. Your voice, your views, your vision.
Hello and welcome to Open, the one and only show that opens the Bronx and the rest of the world right to you. I'm your guest host, Cristina Pagan, filling in for Darren Jaime, and today we'll update you on what's happening in and around our community and around the world. First up, as of this morning, New York City school bus drivers have gone on strike, and we'll find out what this means for Bronxites. After that, we'll hear about an organization with a holistic approach to creating social justice in the borough of the Bronx. Plus, we'll be joined by a new organization giving former prisoners the opportunity to join the workforce and re-enter the community. And finally, our borough historian will provide us with a rich lesson on the history of both the Bronx and BronxNet. So stay tuned, all this and much more is headed your way because we are now officially open. Bronxites. I'm your host, Cristina Pagan. Today is Wednesday, January 16th, 2013. Of course, you're watching Open, the only live and interactive program that brings the Bronx and New York City straight to your TV set. We want to hear from you, so tweet us throughout the show and we'll display your opinions on the air throughout our program. Bus drivers providing bus services to the majority of New York schools began a strike as of this morning. Our cameras went out into the open to see how Bronxites have been affected. Let's take a look.
This is the bus driver strike. The last bus driver strike was 30 years ago and lasted for 3 months. I had the opportunity to speak to 2 crossing guards who explained to me that there have been high volume of traffic and many parents walking their children to school. For BronxNet, this is Bianca Ortiz.
Thank you, Bianca, for that report. If your child's bus route has been affected, the city and schools have provided a number of options. If your child uses a school bus, once they are at school, they will receive a Metro card. If your child is in kindergarten, 1st or 2nd grade, you may request a Metro card from the school to accompany your child. The Metro cards provided by the schools will be effective on subways beginning today and on buses beginning tomorrow, January 17th. If the Metro card does not work, you can bring it to the school to be replaced. If you drive your child to school, you can be reimbursed 55 cents per mile. If your child takes a car service or taxi to school, you will be reimbursed for the trip once you submit a form and the receipts. For continuing updates throughout the day and to find all the reimbursement and request forms you may need, please visit schools.nyc.gov/offices/transportation/default HTM. The Office of Pupil Transportation has stated that they are doing everything possible to have minimal disruption to student learning. We have to take a quick break, but coming up, we'll hear about the Bronx Defenders Organization and what they're doing to protect the civil liberties of Bronxites.
Separate raw meats from other foods by using different cutting boards. 3,000 Americans will die from food poisoning this year. Keep your family safer. Check your steps at foodsafety.gov.
This is so cool, Dad. Awesome. This is so cool, Dad.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of siblings in foster care who'll take you just as you are.
Mom, I'm not gonna go to college.
What are you saying? You've got to go to college.
Well, they offered me a job and...
Son, college is much more important.
No.
Yes.
No, Mom.
Yes.
Anyways, it's my decision.
Okay, well then decide what degree you're going to get because you will go to college.
Their tomorrow depends on your words today. The Hispanic Scholarship Fund has the information you need to help your kids go to college.
Up, college is hard. Down, those books are heavy.
My sport is football, but my passion is education. So every year I take promising high schoolers on a college tour to show them that higher education means a brighter future. My name is Nnamdi Asamoah. I don't just wear the shirt, I live it.
Find out how you can live United for education. Give, advocate, volunteer. Go to liveunited.org.
Do you wear this?
I'm your host, Christina Pagan. The New York City Police Department has instated the Clean Hall policy as part of the Stop and Frisk program, allowing officers to patrol in and around private properties. Here to discuss more about this policy and what the Bronx Defenders Organization is doing to prevent this from taking place is civil action attorney Molly Covell. Welcome.
Hi, good morning. How are you?
So I'd love to know first what the Stop and Frisk program is in total. What does it mean?
The Stop and Frisk program is something that's been in place for years, but under Mayor Bloomberg we've seen an incredible increase in the use of it by the New York City Police Department. And what it means is that the police officers essentially go to locations that they find to be high in crime, or they go to neighborhoods or parts of the city, and they stop and question literally hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people every year. And the problem that civil liberties lawyers have with it is that actually the number of so-called guilty people, the number of people who they actually end up arresting, is a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of that. And so what we believe is going on is that the police are actually doing this unconstitutionally. And at the Bronx Defenders, which is a holistic public defender in the South Bronx, we represent people in criminal court in the Bronx. And we were seeing multiple people who are being arrested for visiting their friends and in their own homes sometimes, and sometimes not even inside the buildings, in what was called the Clean Halls program. The Clean Halls program is somewhat separate from Stop and Frisk. It's a program that was started about 20 years ago, and it enrolls private apartment buildings, your standard New York City apartment buildings, in a program with their local precincts so that police can enter the buildings and do what's called vertical patrols. They walk up and down the stairwells. And what we were seeing was that the police were basically stopping everybody they saw in these buildings, and occasionally stopping people outside the building on suspicion of trespass. And this just doesn't reach constitutional muster. The Constitution limits the police in what they can do, and they have to have a reasonable suspicion before they can really stop someone and force them to answer questions. And so we were just seeing multiple people being stopped, and then even people being arrested when they were visiting friends, when they were outside of their own homes. And so what we did was we collaborated with Latino Justice Pearl Dev and the New York Civil Liberties Union to file a lawsuit in March that challenges the sort of whole policing practices around the Clean Halls program. Our lawsuit is part of a larger group of lawsuits that's challenging the policing practices at the housing authority buildings and also the policing, just the whole Stop and Frisk citywide. But our lawsuit was really targeted to the Clean Halls buildings. And in October of this past year, we had a hearing to basically get what's called a preliminary injunction. And we were asking the court to say, this particular behavior is so unconstitutional that it has to be stopped immediately. while the rest of the case is pending to figure out, all of the different legal aspects of the case. That this is an urgent matter, that people's constitutional rights are being systematically violated. And so just last week, we received a decision from the judge. This judge is in the Southern District of New York that said that the practices we were challenging in the hearing in October were in fact unconstitutional, and that the city has to behave according to the law. And there's going to be further relief ordered in terms of monitoring and supervision and training the police officers. So that's going to be happening in March.
How does one differentiate between visiting a friend or trespassing? I mean, that seems it's a very fine line, touchy subject, so I could understand where people would be concerned about their civil liberties. What's the next step in the process?
Well, the next step for our lawsuit is going to be an inquiry with the court, potentially a hearing, or potentially another kind of process. It has sort of yet to be determined, to determine exactly what the police department can do about stopping these practices. For now, the police are ordered to stop, basically stopping people who are outside of the buildings. That's the particular behavior that we're really concerned with, that they can't stop them on suspicion of trespassing if they're outside. Because that's just not enough. So, they need something more to go on. And the city is going to appeal that ruling. They're already in the process of appealing it. And so the next question is whether or not the appellate court, the appeals court, will actually put a stop to our victory during the appeal. So it's a little bit of a complicated legal situation. But the exciting news is that the Center for Constitutional Rights is, among other organizations, bringing a trial on the whole stop and frisk program, all of the hundreds and hundreds of thousands of stops that happen every year, and that's going to be happening in March. So all of these things are very interconnected, and if people are concerned about the police in their neighborhoods, I urge them to come to the court in March, and it's open, it's free, it's open to the public, and find out what's going on and get involved.
Is there any website or any way that they can contact you to find more information about this?
Of course, yes. Our website is thebronxdefenders.org. We're also on Twitter and Facebook. And we're also having a town hall meeting tomorrow night in East Harlem, actually. What we believe is the lawsuit's very important. As a lawyer, I have to believe that we can get justice in the courts. But this is not going to change. The police department is not going to start becoming more systematically respectful of New York citizens, and especially young men of color who are really disproportionately affected by these policies, until we see more of a movement in the streets. And what we really need is to get more of the community members involved to talk about what kind of policing do we really want in the city. It's not just about saying, no, we don't want police. We want free reign. You know what I mean? It's about really creating our own policing and trying to figure out a way that police can solve our problems and help us without being so confrontational, without being systematically violating the Constitution.
Yeah, disenfranchising the people that they're trying to serve.
Exactly.
How do people? I know that specifically in minority communities, there is a fear of the police and retaliation and talking and speaking out against policies like this, or even just having them in their communities. How do people get over that and be able to contact you and be part of this particular lawsuit? How would you suggest that people confront that?
Well, I think it's a fair fear. I think when you live in certain neighborhoods of the Bronx and you see the police on your corner every day and you feel that they are distrustful of you and that they, that we've set up this sort of relationship of fear and mistrust, I agree that it can be very scary to come out. But if you want to come with a friend or with a group of people to the Bronx Defenders Town Hall, they can't stop us if there's enough of us on the street. They can't do anything, to retaliate when we win victories in federal court. That's really, what can they do? They can't go arrest the judge. So we think that it's important to realize that by coming forward we don't believe that they are going to retaliate. And actually, if they did, they would be even more in violation of the law. And so actually, you would be, in a position of, winning even more against them if we could see that kind of behavior and prove it.
How long has the lawsuit been going on?
Well, the first lawsuit was filed, I believe, in 2006, and that's the one that challenges the whole stop and frisk program. The one that we filed against the Clean Halls program was filed in March of 2012, so it hasn't even been a year yet. We're very excited about the victory we got last week. Even if the city, manages to pause it while it's being appealed, we think it's an incredible message to send that a federal judge has looked at all of the evidence that we put forward and said, you know what? City, you can't do this anymore. This is really, this behavior is unconstitutional. That hasn't happened, regarding this kind of policing practice to the city in many, many years. And so we think it's a really big victory for the community members in the Bronx.
What's been the excuse of the city for this program even beginning and
Well,
continuing?
The program itself, the Clean Halls program, was begun by landlords who really wanted police in their buildings because they felt like there was lawlessness in their buildings and that there were too many people, either, too much drug use or too much other kinds of, illegal behavior going on. And basically they wanted a way to get the police in the buildings, and so they signed basically a contract with the precinct to allow the police to come in. If that didn't exist, right, the police would really need a warrant to go inside a private property like that. So they were just trying to create a program where the police could go inside of buildings where there was high crime. But what we found is basically, and the city, essentially acknowledged this in our evidence, that the police were behaving as though they were, doormen, which is not the way police are supposed to behave. They're not supposed to ask every single person, what are you doing here? They're not supposed to ask, stop, give me your identification, do you really belong here? They need to have something more. They need to see someone, breaking a lock, or right, hanging out on a roof, or sneaking out of a fire escape, or Right. Those are the kinds of factors that would give a police officer reasonable suspicion to stop someone, and we don't challenge that kind of stop. What we're challenging is literally where there's just someone walking out of a door, right. And we had evidence of this. Not only did our clients come forward and testify about the times that they had been stopped and arrested just for being outside of these buildings, but we actually had statistical evidence that from the police owned data that showed that the police records were showing thousands of people stopped on suspicion of trespass. The police write that down, when they were stopped outside of these buildings. And there was no particular reason for it besides the fact that they were proximate to those buildings. The best piece of evidence we had, though, and the one that I think really convinced the judge, was that the district attorney's office in the Bronx agreed with us. And they saw too many cases where the police officer just didn't have a good enough reason to stop someone, or just weren't doing their job to make sure that the person really didn't belong there. And they were having to dismiss those cases too many times. They had hundreds of cases every year. So what happened was the district attorney's office actually sent a letter to the police department, and then took the unusual step of actually testifying in our hearing to say that the police department had been doing this just too many times, and it's burdensome for the district attorney's office. They have thousands of cases every year that they're dealing with. They shouldn't have to be wasting public money and time dealing with cases where the police are the ones who are behaving illegally, not the person who was arrested. And so the judge really saw that was a very unusual thing to happen, that the district attorney was testifying, and I think that's what tipped the scale in our favor.
Great. Can you tell us one more time, you having a town hall tomorrow?
The town hall is tomorrow. It's at Taino Towers, actually in East Harlem.
240 East 123rd Street.
Exactly, and it's from 6:30 to 8:30. We'll also be having another town hall in the Bronx in the spring sometime, so keep posted for that. what we just want people who experience these kinds of behaviors to come out and talk about what kinds of things we want from the police and what kinds of things we can do to change the way the New York City Police Department acts.
Great. Thank you so much for coming. For more information, you can visit the Bronx Defenders website at bronxdefenders.org. We have to take a quick break, but coming up, we'll hear about an organization providing work to former prisoners. But first, Bronx Works recently celebrated their 40th anniversary, highlighting the dramatic improvements they have made to the quality of lives here in the Bronx. BronxNet correspondent Arlene Makoko has the story.
I've worked really hard to be where I'm at, and I almost didn't make it.
But Jennifer Montano did, thanks to Bronx Works, a nonprofit organization located in the Mount Eden section that for 40 years has been helping people like her reach their goals. She went from a failing student where she missed 2 months of classes at another school to the honor roll, even traveling to South Africa to meet Nelson Mandela after winning a writing contest with 12 other students from across the city.
It feels great.
And she's not alone. During their 40th anniversary celebration, Bronx Works introduced a film featuring just a handful of the thousands of lives they've touched.
What we tried to show in the video is that it spans this huge history of the Bronx, from when the Bronx was really at its nadir, its lowest point, to where the Bronx has fully come back. All the housing has been rebuilt. The communities now are active, vital.
A stark contrast to what things were like when they opened their doors.
Is that there would be a senior citizen, one person left in an abandoned building, and they had maybe lived there for 40, 50 years, maybe didn't have any family, couldn't relocate, and they had to get out. Their lives were in danger.
Today, it's not only the seniors. Job readiness training, parenting workshops, and more are available, says Ken Smalls.
This is one of the institutions here in the Bronx that has done a lot to work on the issue of street homelessness. And as a result of the work that we've done over the past 15 years, there's been a tremendous decline in street homelessness in this borough. And we're very proud that over the course of the last 7 years, there's been more than a 70% decline.
And that's something that's got the attention of the city.
A wonderful organization that cares deeply about everyone living in the Bronx, and that love and dedication and enveloping them with care and services and everything they need, I know, is felt by everyone in all their programs.
They help to bring them back into society, and that is really what we're supposed to do. I am just so proud of the work they do.
Each table featured a biography totaling 40 throughout the room, all people whose lives have changed for the better. People like Alfredo Chaucer.
I'm a different man, and I feel that is because of things that I learned from this program.
Jennifer Montano is just one success story. They've helped so many others over the last 40 years, and they plan to continue that in the years to come. For BronxNet, this is Arlene Makoko.
Separate raw meats from other foods by using different cutting boards. 3,000 Americans will die from food poisoning this year. Keep your family safer. Check your steps at foodsafety.gov.
This is so cool, Dad. This is so cool, Dad.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of siblings in foster care who'll take you just as you are.
So here are the keys.
Congratulations, it's officially yours. I'm sure you'll have many happy years here.
Except for you, because you'll be gone 3 years from now, struck down by the same disease that got your father. So you won't be around for them. And sadly, it could have been detected early with a simple test, but you didn't have it. Okay, who wants to check out the backyard?
For a list of tests every man should have, go to ahrq.gov.
Take my hand and start a brand new day.
Underneath everything we are, underneath everything we do, we are all people, connected, interdependent, united. And when we reach out a hand to one, we can influence the condition of all. That's what it means to live united.
Hello, viewers. I'm your host, Cristina Pagan. And remember, this is a live and interactive talk show, so join in on the conversation by tweeting us at BronxNetTV. The Bronx County Reentry Task Force is a new organization that was created to provide individuals recently released from state prison with the skills they need to successfully re-enter the community and reduce the risk of reoffending. Here to tell us more about the organization is Chris McLaughlin. Welcome, sir.
Thank you for having me on this morning.
No problem. Could you tell us a little bit about what the Bronx County Reentry Task Force does?
Sure. I'll give you a little bit of background context. The task force itself has really spawned from an initiative that was started in 2010 called the Bronx Reentry Working Group, which was really started by a small group of individuals who were service providers, community partners, who wanted to tackle this issue of reentry of people who are being released from prison or jail and are coming back home to the community. And obviously they have very specific needs that need to be addressed to help them return and become productive members of our community and society in general. From that really organic effort through the individuals who were initially involved, it really just kept growing and growing, bringing in more community partners, organizations that services the population. And in 2011, in 2012, actually were able to apply to the state, the Division of Criminal Justice Services, to receive funding to start a task force here in the Bronx, which we've just started at the tail end of last year. And the task force itself, our job is we work very closely with the Department of Corrections and Community Supervision on that community supervision side, which is formerly known as parole. And we have individuals who are recently released from state prison, and we work with them to really take an all-hands-on-deck approach to address the issues that they have, be it educational, vocational, job training, employment itself. It could be even something as simple as like housing, even running the gamut to things such as substance use treatment for those who need it, everything like that, to make sure that we work very proactively with their officer and community supervision so that their needs are addressed, and then that now that they're home, they'll stay home and they won't do something that'll result with them going back into state prison.
How does one get involved in the program?
Sure. There's really two tracks to the Reentry Task Force in terms of the service provision that we do. The main track with which we deal are individuals who are identified on the community supervision side prior to release from state prison. They're individuals who are identified as being most fit for these services, having a moderate to high risk of reoffending. So what happens is that community supervision then sends them consent form while they're still currently in the state facility. Once they agree to participate, we have a case conference where we discuss their specific needs, and then we work with our service providers to kind of develop a game plan for these individuals that once they return here under community supervision, we kind of have a game plan ready to go so that they get the services they need so that they can reintegrate into society and have success, and then really be able to stay here and be the success stories that people like to hear about.
Can you tell us about one of these success stories?
Sure. I speak very anecdotally. We've just really started intaking some of our participants in the last few months, but I have a couple individuals who, since being released, have been able to get hooked up with various services they need, for example, housing, substance use treatment, employment programs, and they've been actively involved in their programs, meeting the conditions of their community supervision while being involved in the programs, and are currently in the process where they're getting themselves back on their feet. I mean, it's too early to say they're fully back 100% in, but the feedback I've received from them when I speak with these individuals and when I speak with their service providers is that their adjustment period is going well, and it seems like it's something that's very worthwhile and is very beneficial to these individuals.
Have you found that people are very receptive to help? I know some people that would come out of the prison that they would be a little resistant to coming back into society or what that means, and the help that you provide, how have you found that people have reacted to it?
Sure. I mean, the people who are involved with the task force thus far have been pretty receptive. I mean, I think something that makes it more likely is the fact that they do have to consent and agree to participate in the program before we start doing any work, that there's already a little bit of buy-in on their end before the case would come to me come to our service providers, and then we'd start trying to figure out a game plan for that individual. So I think the fact that it's voluntary on their side, that they agree to participate, is really beneficial in that regard.
I know that I'm sure that we've all heard of people having trouble getting jobs specifically when they come out of prison because of their record.
Sure.
How does your task force combat that and help them?
Sure. Obviously, that's a very difficult issue for a lot of individuals to have to deal with upon release. What we do is we have a number of our service providers have specific job training programs and employment services. And with regard to making sure that they get those services, it's intensive to follow up with them to make sure that if it's a specific service provider that does the job training, that they're going to the program that they need to do. It's really about making sure that the individual is getting the services that they need that will help them succeed.
Do you have any programs that also involve maybe the families of these the released former inmates?
Sure. I mean, a lot of what we do on the task force side, it's helping the individuals get hooked up with programs that meet their specific needs. We do have service providers who are involved who do family reunification services, general support. A lot of the individuals who are released are men, and sometimes men have families of their own which they've lost contact with, having been incarcerated. So we do have service providers who do provide services to help them who are now back home be able to reunify with their families to help begin and help heal and have healthy relationships there.
Where is the Bronx County Reentry Task Force located?
Sure. We're in the State Supreme Court building. We're associated with the Bronx Borough President's office, so that's where my office is there. We do have a telephone number and email address that, while I mentioned that we deal with individuals who are specifically selected on the community supervision side who have these high service needs, we do accept some walk-ins for people who have needs. I mean, myself, the task force, and our community partners are really dedicated to helping everyone who we can who has needs, so that our community is better off in the end.
Where do you see the Bronx County Reentry Task Force going in the future?
Sure.
Is there like a plan to expand?
Sure.
services?
I mean, we have very strong leadership both from the county executive side and the borough president's office and with community supervision, and our goals are to grow this program as much as possible. With the grant that we received from the state, we have to service 125 individuals in this funding period. However, our hope is that we're going to demonstrate success here, that we can receive greater funding so that we can expand the program, service more individuals, and really make sure that the programs are available to everyone who really needs it. That we, at a bare minimum, if someone comes in and says that they need something, for example, education program to get their GED, that we can get it hooked up so that they're immediately put in contact with someone who does that, who provides that program for them, so they can get on the right path and get what they need done.
You mentioned that it's a voluntary for the inmates to become part of the task force. What does that entail for them? What kind of commitment is that for them?
Sure. On the participant side, as I mentioned, they receive the consent form, everything like that, while they're still in the state prison. And what we tell them, I speak with them shortly after their release, is what we're going to do, the game plan that we develop for them, is really to help them meet the conditions of their release. I mean, we're not trying to overburden them. I mean, a lot of times when you're released from state prison, you have a lot on your plate. I mean, some people have been incarcerated for a significant period of time, and there's just a lot of things that need to be done to start that adjustment period. So what we do is really try and make sure that everything that we do in terms of getting them hooked up with services, everything like that, will meet the conditions of their release. So it's really kind of a complementary thing to help them get done what they need to do to meet their conditions, but then to also be sort of like an extra layer of support, that if they have an issue, they can contact us, that we can be a facilitator with their parole officer, so that what might be a small issue now can be resolved before it might become a larger issue that would result in a parole violation or result in an individual committing another crime and end up going back to prison.
Do you have a website or an email that
Sure.
people can reach you at?
I can be reached at, email address is BronxCRTF, that's for Bronx County Reentry Task Force, BronxCRTF@gmail.com. And online we do have, through our partnership with the Bronx Reentry Working Group, a website, bronxreentry.org. And on that website there is actually a directory of local service providers who provide services for those who have histories of criminal justice involvement.
Thank you so much for joining us. Stay where you are, because up next we'll hear about some of the fascinating history of the Bronx. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now the big guy comes up to bat, hitting .342 with 92 RBIs and 36 homers.
Chill raw and prepared foods promptly. 1 in 6 Americans will get sick from food poisoning this year. Keep your family safer. Check your steps at foodsafety.gov.
For you. Hey, Mom.
You know, girls, I used to cheer back in my day. Ready? Okay! Go team!
That was amazing. Mom, that was amazing.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of siblings in foster care who'll take you just as you are.
Sir, are you okay? Everything's fine. Thanks.
You wouldn't ignore this, so why ignore the signs of a stroke? Call 911 immediately, because time lost is brain lost.
Hey, how's it going? Sir, are you okay? What? Oh, this? It's probably nothing. I'm sure it'll go away.
Go away? But sir, that can't be good.
No, it's cool. Really. Do you want a napkin or something? Everything's fine. Thanks.
You wouldn't ignore this, so why ignore the signs of a stroke? At the first warning signs, call 911 immediately, because time lost is brain lost.
G-morning, sunshine. Wakey, wakey. You up? What'd you dream about? Me? JK. Text me back. I'll keep texting till you wake up. Are your parents home later? Is this something I did? Exclamation point, question mark? This isn't a joke. Hello? Text me.
Welcome back. I'm your host, Christina Pagan. Our final guest is here to tell us about the history of the Bronx since its birth in 1639, the significant role of BronxNet in the borough, and the upcoming celebration of the anniversary of the annexation of Bronx County. We welcome appointed Bronx historian Lloyd Ulton to open. Welcome, sir.
Oh, very happy to be here.
Thank you. Nice to meet you. So, could you tell us, well, first of all, how did you get appointed as the Bronx historian?
Well, there is a law in the state of New York that says that every county in the state should have a historian appointed by the local appointing authority. By that law, in the 5 counties of the state that are also the 5 boroughs of the city of New York, we are called borough historians, and we are appointed by our respective borough presidents and serve at his pleasure. Now, I was originally appointed in 1996 by Fernando Ferrer, and I was reappointed by Adolfo Carrion, and then reappointed by Ruben Diaz Jr.
They don't want to let you go, huh?
Yeah, I don't know why. But by state law, we are supposed to make recommendations for the preservation of records. If one of those records manages to wander away, we're supposed to track it down and bring it back. We're supposed to encourage private institutions and organizations and businesses to preserve their records. And then we're supposed to use these records in order to write the history of the borough. But in addition to that, there are some things that have been accrued to the office that are not exactly in the law. For instance, borough historians also have lectures. If people want us to speak, we will speak. And we also give tours, walking tours, bus tours, and things like that. We go into the schools if people ask us to, and we talk to the kids in the class, everywhere from elementary school to graduate school.
You sound like a busy guy.
Yeah, and and of course, in the Bronx Borough Historian's Office, we work very closely with the Bronx County Historical Society in order to encourage this. And one of the things that we're required to do is every January we're supposed to have an annual report that we give to the borough president and also to the New York State historian, exactly what we've done for the year.
Mhm.
And so, that keeps me busy.
Well, that and history never ends. I mean, every day.
That's right. And every day it's getting longer.
Indeed it is. So, when did the Bronx become a borough?
Well, the Bronx became a borough in 1898, but it was a part of the city of New York before then.
Oh, yeah.
Most people don't know this. In 1874, as early as 1874, all of the land west of the Bronx River was annexed to New York City, became part of New York City and New York County.
Mm.
Then in 1895, the area east of the Bronx River was annexed to New York City, became part of New York City and New York County.
Mhm.
Then in 1898, the city took over Brooklyn, Queens, and Staten Island and established the borough system. And they decided that the two areas previously annexed should also become a separate borough. They didn't know what to call it because it never had a name before.
Mhm.
So they looked at a map, and right smack through the middle of the territory ran the Bronx River, so they named it after the river, the borough of the Bronx. And that's why it's always the Bronx and not just plain Bronx,
Right.
because we're named after the river. Now, interestingly enough, while the Bronx was a borough of the city of New York,
Mhm.
it was not a county of the state of New York.
Oh.
Both Manhattan and the Bronx were together in New York County. Therefore, any legal work that had to be done, any access to courts, any permits that you needed, you had to go all the way down to the lower part of Manhattan Island in order to do the work. And before there was subways, that was a long walk. Yes. So as a result, almost immediately, agitation began to grow for the creation of the borough of the Bronx as a county of the state.
Mhm.
And it took a long time for that to happen. And it wasn't until January 1st, 1914, that the Bronx became a county of the state of New York. It was the 62nd and last county to be created by the state. And the interesting thing is, by that time, they had forgotten why the word "the" was in the name. And so the law that creates the county creates it as the County of Bronx. So it's the borough of the Bronx, but it's the County of Bronx, which is interesting.
That is interesting. Memories are so short. That's why we have historians like you, right?
Yeah, right. You know, we tend to lengthen things out a bit.
These are some of your books, I
Right.
see. Can you talk to us about each, I guess, era that you have here?
Well,
Some of them seem to overlap.
Yeah, they do overlap. These books were written in different years, and not necessarily in this order, but in the order of the content. The first one would be The Birth of the Bronx, 1609 to 1900.
Mhm.
And it consists of basically accounts written by people in the time period of what it was like and what they did. But also loads of pictures. Now, in those days, in most of that time period, the cameras really didn't work that well. And so consequently, we have pictures, engravings, lithographs, and things like that, until the time when you do get into photographs and you do see some of the very early photographs. What we have here in this picture, in this book, by the way, is a photograph of the very first photograph ever taken of the Bronx that has survived,
Wow.
from 1857. It is the village of Tremont as seen from Mount Hope. And when you
That
look
sounds
at
very
it,
serene, doesn't it?
well, when you look at it, you see, farms and stables and all of that, and you take a look at Webster Avenue as a little stream, and Tremont Avenue is a dirt road, and there's nobody in sight.
Very different from today,
Very
isn't it?
different from today, yes. So that's the that's the first one, and you could look at it, and you could see how very different things were then, and also some of the ways in which things remain the same.
Mhm.
So that is that's the very first book. It's called The Birth of the Bronx.
Could you tell us a little bit about BronxNet's role in the Bronx? And
Yeah, BronxNet it came into existence when cable came to the borough with Cablevision. There is a law, federal law, that says basically that cable providers must provide stations for public access. And they set aside 4 stations, 67, 68, 69, and 70, for BronxNet. Now, the interesting thing about BronxNet, it was the very first public access stations that produced their own shows, like Open. All of the other public access stations were open, of course, to the people who lived there if they wanted to produce their own shows and put it on television. But they didn't produce their own. BronxNet was the very first to produce their own shows. Moreover, one of the very first shows that we put on, and you can see a remnant of it in Open today in the beginning, the very first news show talking solely about Bronx news was at BronxNet.
We had News 67 a long time
That's
ago.
right, News 67. And what happened was that the News 67 kept up the thing going until Cablevision established its own News 12, The Bronx. And then they didn't want to compete with each other, and so that went by the wayside. But you opened up this show with with what is happening today, and that's news.
Cool. Well, we have to take a quick break, but when we return, we will share more of the history of the great borough of the Bronx.
Be free. Nice, Dad. Nice, Dad. Nice.
Charles!
Nice, Dad.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of siblings in foster care who'll take you just as you are.
Sir, are you okay? Everything's fine. Thanks.
You wouldn't ignore this, so why ignore the signs of a stroke? Call 911 immediately, because time lost is brain lost.
Coming home can be hard if you're a veteran of Iraq or Afghanistan. You may feel like you're all alone. But you're not alone. At IAVA.org, your fellow vets are all around you. Join our free online community, get the resources you need, and connect to other vets who know where you're coming from. IAVA.org. We've got your back.
Welcome back to Open. We're here with Lloyd Ulton, our resident Bronx historian, and we're going to talk a little bit more about what the Bronx is and the history of it. Mr. Ulton, welcome back.
Thank you.
Let's talk about the Bronx. You said you were a Bronx-born boy.
Yes.
What was it like when you were growing up?
Well, it was always dynamic and always changing. When I was born, the largest single ethnic group in the Bronx, and most people don't believe this, were Eastern European Jews.
Mm-hmm.
And you had large numbers of Irish and large numbers of Italians.
Mm-hmm.
Now, as I was growing up, you had increasing numbers of black people from the South and from Harlem moving into the Bronx, and increasing numbers of Puerto Ricans from the island and East Harlem moving into the Bronx.
Right.
And so you had that mix added to it. So to the point now, the majority of the people who are living in the Bronx, bare majority, are Latino of various kinds, Puerto Rican, Dominican, Mexican, etc. 33% of the, or 30% of the people of the Bronx are now black, be they, Americans from the South, or West Indians, or from Africa.
Right.
And the rest are, according to the census, other.
We're all an other, I guess.
Right, yes.
So you were talking about your first book here. Which one is your favorite book?
I never play favorites. I never play favorites. I find something, charming and something interesting in all of them. That's why I wrote them.
Right.
Okay. So I have the Bronx in the Innocent Years, 1890 to 1925. That is also consists of memoirs of people who lived into the 20th century, in middle and later 20th century, looking back at that time and saying, well, this is what it was like when I grew up.
Oh, wow.
In that period. And again, this is with the time when the Bronx was moving from what was a suburb of New York City, in a sense, to a real urban area. And you find, again, photographs there that you could remember, and I remember that building, but it looks a little older today. To say, hey, that was there at that time,
right?
That sort of thing.
One of my favorite quotes from an old movie, which I don't remember what it was called, is "I want to go to the country. I want to go to the Bronx."
Yeah.
So back, I think it was from the 1930s. They're talking about the Bronx being the country.
Well, the very first sound motion picture mentions the Bronx.
Does it?
Yeah, it's called The Jazz Singer with Al Jolson. And when he comes home to be a star on Broadway and he sees Mama, he sings to her and he plays the piano and he stops, and as he's fingering the piano, he tells her that he's going to be a star, and then they're going to move. They're going to go where all the Bergs are, the Goldbergs, the Greenbergs, and all of that. They're going to move to the Bronx.
What a wonderful place to be.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why my next book is called The Beautiful Bronx.
There you go.
Yeah, that was the first one that I've written. So in a sense, this is written like a memoir. This is from 1920 to 1950, which tells the stories about growing up in a period of some prosperity, and then the Great Depression, and then the war years, and then the prosperity that followed that in 1950. And again, the changes and the things that you see there. I mean, how many people know that Franklin Roosevelt campaigned for president of the Bronx?
Did he really?
Yes, he did. And I witnessed it.
Did he roll up the hill?
No. He actually came in a car when he went by automobile. So, but you find also a picture of Harry Truman campaigning in the Bronx.
Wow.
So you have things like that. And the third book, The Bronx, it was only, fourth book of The Bronx, it was only yesterday. Again, a big overlap from 1935 to 1960. Tells the story of how we got out of the Depression and into the war, and then also the prosperity that followed, and well into the mid 1960s. And I don't know how many people know that John F. Kennedy also campaigned in the Bronx. I witnessed all three of those. There's Roosevelt and Truman and Kennedy.
The Bronx seems to be was the place to be, still the place to be.
Yeah, well, actually, most people don't know this, but
I think there he is.
For a period of time, John F. Kennedy actually lived in the Bronx.
Did he now?
Yes, he grew up for a period of time in Riverdale.
Wow.
And he went to the Riverdale Country School, which is a private school, and they still have his graduation picture.
Wow, I did not know that. That is
sure. And when he campaigned in 1960 for president, he had a big rally at Fordham Road in the Grand Concourse, and his first words out of his mouth were, I'm from the Bronx. And say, albeit Riverdale, but it is the Bronx.
That's right. People forget that all the time. All the time. So what's the biggest change you've seen in the Bronx in terms of people's respect for its history and its continuation?
Well, oddly enough, most people do not realize the Bronx has a history, and a very great one at that. They don't begin to appreciate it, in many cases, until after they moved elsewhere.
Of course.
And just as an example, how many people know that the Bronx produced two of the founding fathers of this nation? Lewis Morris signed the Declaration of Independence, and his half-brother Gouverneur Morris was one of the principal framers of the Constitution of the United States.
That's right.
How many people know that the Iron Dome of the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. was manufactured in the Bronx?
Wow.
And then sent down there? How many people know that the statue of Abraham Lincoln in the Lincoln Memorial was sculpted in the Bronx by immigrant Bronx Italians?
Wow.
How many people know that puffed wheat and puffed rice were developed in the New York Botanical Garden in the Bronx? How many people know that the American buffalo, the bison, was saved from extinction in the Bronx Zoo?
Really?
Really.
Oh.
Almost every American buffalo roaming the West is descended from the Bronx buffalo, which means when you go to Yellowstone National Park and a buffalo comes over to you and speaks to you in a Bronx accent, you know why.
Know what you're looking at.
Yeah, right. And of course, we produced, a lot of people. How many people know, for instance, that the first successful implantation of a heart pacemaker occurred in the Bronx in 1955 in Montefiore Hospital?
Wow.
These are just examples of the great history that we all share, every blessed one of us. And we've had some great people coming from the Bronx. Authors and people in show business, and statesmen. Colin Powell is a Bronxite. E.L. Doctorow, the guy who wrote Ragtime, is a Bronxite. Edgar Allan Poe lived in the Bronx.
That's right.
Rita Moreno.
Right, she did live here. She's one of my idols.
Right, she lived in the Bronx, and a wonderful person too. Mary Higgins Clark.
Everybody's been here.
Right.
Everybody's from the Bronx. Even if you're not from the Bronx, you're from the Bronx.
Tony Orlando lived in the Bronx for 10 years.
That's right.
And so we have a lot to be proud of.
All right. So thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome.
For more information, you can visit the BronxHistoricalSociety.org. Before we close the show, I'd like to announce that on February 14th, Valentine's Day, from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., Bronx Borough President Ruben Diaz Jr. will be hosting his 6th annual Sweetheart Luncheon for couples that have been married for over 50 years or under one. For more information, you can call Larsenia Walton, Director of Senior Services, at 718-590-6248. It's been a pleasure coming into your homes. We'd like to thank our guests for joining us, and especially you, our viewers, for tuning in. You can tune in tonight for the recablecast of Open at 10 p.m. on Channel 67, or watch anytime on the web at bronxnet.org. From all of us here at Open, have a great week, and don't forget to keep your heart and mind open. Thank you, sir.